It doesn't matter how much preparation I've done for meetings. When I'm called on, my mind goes blank. I know the material, but when it's time to deliver, nothing is there. What can I do to stop this from happening?
Sympathetic nervous system response and exposure therapy. So what I mean by that is you're totally right. Prep. You're going to totally prep. You've got all your notes written. You've done all this stuff. And boom, you go into the meeting, you totally blank. The way I look at the sympathetic nervous system, so our fight or flight, it's like a glass wall that descends from the ceiling. And so that glass wall is always just a little bit poking out from the ceiling. And that's because the sympathetic nervous system, which again, it's like fight or flight, and then parasympathetic nervous system, which are state of calm and relaxation, they're always in like a constant negotiation, and one is never fully on and the other's ever fully off. So if that sympathetic nervous system, if you're at your most calm, that little glass wall is still sticking out from the ceiling. In front of you is a toolbox, and on that toolbox is two levels. The top level are your most basic skills, which are still super good. Basic skills would be ability to answer general questions, ability to ask general questions, your ability to track what someone is saying, basic use of your physical and verbal presence, ability to access quickly your short-term memory. The deeper level of that toolbox would be access to long-term memory and creative thought, your ability to negotiate, empathy, answering more complex questions, your ability to use physical and verbal presence to tone set and really like set the tone of the room. All that kind of stuff would be lower level. If you're someone who gets lit up by having a speaking engagement, the way you should look at it is that glass wall starts coming down and it gets in between you and your tools. So there's 3 stages of this from the way I look at it. The first stage is the glass wall comes down a quarter of the way. And so that quarter of the way, it is not in between you and the toolbox at all. That is what most people's performance state is. And it could be presenting, it could be going to play like a show, it could be doing a marathon, it could be like whatever it is. It's that space where you're like, okay, I have to go and do something and I want to do well at it. Even if it's something that I find intimidating or scary, or if it's something I really like doing, I want to do well. Nervousness is not bad at all. So when you're nervous, glass wall is a quarter of the way down, you see it, you go into your toolbox, you can access both levels, and then you can create the right kind of response. This is where for the person who asked this question specifically, where I think it starts to get a little hairy for you. Nervousness turns into anxiety. Now, that doesn't mean someone lives with anxiety. It's that they're having an anxious response to something. So now that glass wall is down halfway. At the halfway mark, you can still see the toolbox, but you can't directly reach to it. You have to reach underneath the glass wall. When you reach underneath the glass wall, the length of your arms is shorter. So that means you can only actually hit that top level. That means that people they can do basic questions. They can do basic answers. They can kind of remember the basic elements of a script or a presentation that they've had, but they can't get into more of that creative thinking. They can't get into the long-term memory. They can't read the room effectively. If they get stuck or get off base, they get really off. It's because you don't have those lower levels of things. And you also can't read the room, which is a big one for presentations. If anxiety gets more provoked, then anxiety turns into fear. Glass wall comes all the way down. Then you're only left with a response of fight or flight. So in a presentation format, this is when people totally freeze, or they're like, anything to get through this. So based on what I'm hearing here, it's probably like no matter what you do, how much prep and all those things, you still get into that anxious space. So kind of like the stage 2, and you can kind of sort of get through there. Of course, I don't know all the things that you've done. So when I say exposure therapy, what I'd really be encouraging, it's more than just prep. It's more than just like writing down like your ideas and bullet points or this or that. What I'd be doing is I'd be looking to from an exposure therapy point of view, is you've got to socialize yourself to something so much that it doesn't get to anxiety, that it can only get to nervousness. So that means doing stuff like, I'm not a huge Toastmasters fan, but doing things like Toastmasters, or going more into things where it's like a presentation training or those things, but not like a presentation training, something you're doing consistently. I would be looking to be presenting ideas frequently. So that would be at work, putting up your hand and being like, give me every single presentation you have, or doing it on your off time. If that's like horrifying, you're like, that's the worst advice I've ever gotten, don't worry about it. Then you don't have to do that. But what it does mean is on your own, you should be taping yourself constantly. You should have an iPad or on your computer using Zoom or any of those things you can record yourself. You should be constantly doing presentations over and over again. You should be setting up presentations to your family, to your friends, to all sorts of people where you're constantly practicing. It's not about practicing a presentation. And in fact, if anything, I think you should try and do a bunch of different topics and try your hand at a lot of different things, but you should be constantly taping yourself and presenting and then watching that taping. It's the only way that you can socialize yourself to that level of getting comfortable with it so that it goes from being anxiety, where you're only getting part of your toolbox, to full toolbox in nervousness. A really great way of doing this, by the way, is using other people's presentations. So if you go on TED Talk, get a 2-minute clip that you really like in there and get the transcript for that 2 minutes. And then just tape yourself doing that same 2 minutes over and over and over again. So not only there are you getting some like exposure therapy where you're doing it, but you're also learning someone else's style, because what you should be doing is pretending to be them. That will also help expand your speaker skills. So there's some basic strategies, but you can't practice your way out of it by just practicing for a presentation. It's got to be exposure therapy. So by doing that, it means taping yourself and then looking at that tape over and over again. It is literally the worst thing. I've done it myself. It's horrible, but once you get there and you'll never go back.